try to move quickly in the program, is we're going to discuss first the suitability considerations for senior investors. And we'll explain what that is. It's a term of art for people who do investments, but that's the first thing we'll deal with. The concept of elder financial exploitation is another topic, and it's interrelated with senior investors. And then the idea or the concept of diminishment of capacity has become a very important topic for financial advisors, for senior investors, and for their children. And we'll talk about some of the recent regulations that have come up, and then at the end we'll take some questions at the end of the presentation. So the context of this is that the baby boomers, the generation that was born from 1946 to 1964, the big generation, is retiring at an impressive clip now. I saw a statistic that it's 42 million people in the United States of a population of approximately 300 million are 65 or older and are receiving Social Security benefits. And I thought this was an astounding statistic that for the next 13 years, 10,000 baby boomers will turn 65 each day for the next 13 years. So the considerations that we have to make, not only for the strain on the Social Security system, on the Medicare system, on the Medicaid system, but also for all the questions about wealth transfer, generational issues are going to become paramount. And for those seniors, as they get older, issues of wealth preservation, fixed income, intergenerational transfers are going to be very important. So it's there's a lot here, and the regulators have come to terms with the fact that this is now they're paying attention. So the first thing we'll look at is suitability considerations for senior investors, and in order to do that, I have to give a very brief law lecture on some legal terminology. Now I know some of you probably know this who've worked in the financial sector, but the governing law for the securities industry, especially as it relates to investments, for the buying and selling investments, is the 1934 Securities Exchange Act, which governs markets and the financial institutions that operate in those markets. So a key definition in the Exchange Act and the regulations that came from that is a broker-dealer. And a broker-dealer is a financial institution that engages in the buying and selling of securities, either for its own account or for the account of another. The individuals that work for a broker-dealer are called associated persons. They're called registered reps, also colloquially known as stockbrokers or financial advisors. Those folks are registered with the regulatory agency, and that's who you think of when you think of a stockbroker. The regulators for the securities industry are threefold. Of course, you have the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which is the primary regulator from a federal level. You have probably most people here have heard of the acronym FINRA. FINRA is the organization, it's a quasi-public institution that has the primary regulator of broker-dealers, and then each state has its own regulatory authority or agency that governs, and there's a companion of state laws that governs the obligations and the duties of broker-dealers. So a note on this, though, is that there's a difference between a broker-dealer and a registered investment advisor. It's actually an important distinction. So you can actually buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds and private equity and hedge funds through two different mechanisms. You can buy it through a broker-dealer, which is a wirehouse, something like a Morgan Stanley or UBS or Merrill Lynch, or you can buy it through a registered investment advisor. The key distinction is a broker-dealer, when you buy it, when you have a financial advisor and you call them up and say, I want to buy 100 shares of GE or I want to sell 100 shares of GE, that broker-dealer gets paid on the basis of that transaction. So you'll get a commission. And if you buy a bond from a broker-dealer, you'll pay an embedded markup. So the advice that you receive in the connection of a transaction is called incidental advice. You're not paying them for advice. You're paying them for the transaction associated with the security. A registered investment advisor is just the opposite. You pay that registered investment advisor typically on a wrap fee, like 1% on your assets, You pay them for the advice, and the securities transactions are incidental to that payment. So with that in mind, I put this in, and we won't go over it. It's in the handout. It's a cheat sheet of who sells what. I thought it was handy, but I don't want to waste time on that now. Okay, suitability. So now we're talking about broker-dealers, financial advisors, your large wirehouses, anybody who sells stocks and bonds, really, other than a registered investment advisor. The key concept that you have to understand is suitability. And what suitability is, it's the touchstone of what financial institutions have to do when they are selling you any security or recommending you to take any action. And basically what suitability is, it's a common sense term, but there's a lot embedded in it, is if you have a stockbroker, that stockbroker has to have a reasonable basis based upon your circumstances to recommend that you do anything with a stock or a bond or a mutual fund or anything else. So they have to, in order for them to do that though, they have to know you. And probably some of you have heard of the term know your customer. Know your customer, KYC. What that means is they have to know all sorts of details about you. They have to know your age, the other investments, what other portfolio you might have, your financial situation, your tax status, a whole host of things about you, so they have a financial snapshot of who you are and what would be appropriate or suitable for you. So when they make up the call and say, you know, I think you should buy $100,000 of GE stock, well, if you only have $150,000 in assets and that's putting 2/3 of your net worth, not counting your residence, into one particular stock, that's manifestly unsuitable. But if you have $1 million portfolio and they want to put $50,000 into a stock in a well-managed portfolio, that would make more sense. The trigger of the suitability rule is a recommendation. And what that means is if you call your stockbroker up and say, you know, I was at the country club, the guy next to me said that this is the next hot stock, I want to buy 1,000 shares of it. The broker did not recommend that you do that. He's not responsible for the suitability determination. He may tell you that's not a good idea, or our people don't like that stock, but he's not responsible, nor is the firm responsible for that if you decide to do that investment and lose money. But if he calls you up and says, you know, the guys on my trading desk, they really like this particular bond or they like this stock, now he's triggered, he's made a recommendation to you. If the recommendation has to be suitable, and if the recommendation isn't suitable for you and that stock loses money or that bond doesn't pay as it should or whatnot, then you have a legal right of action against him and the firm. So it's mentioned in the bio, but I spent 9 years at Morgan Stanley prior to coming to the firm several years ago. One of the things that I did was represent Morgan Stanley against customers who said, essentially, that the securities that they had bought were unsuitable for them. It's the most common claim that's made against a broker-dealer, and it's actually quite easy to make, probably too easy. So as it relates to seniors, the factors, I will tell you, as a lawyer who had represented a firm in arbitrations on investment losses, seniors are the hardest to beat. When they come, and especially ones who have net worths less than $1 million who lost money, it's very hard. They're sympathetic plaintiffs. They're very difficult to beat. And oftentimes, it's because the financial advisor didn't pay enough attention to these types of factors, which are the investment time horizon. How long, what type of time horizon does the investor have? What is the objective of the account? Is it to preserve capital? Is it to accumulate wealth? Is it to generate income? What are the liquidity needs? And liquidity means how quickly do you need to turn those investments into cash? So if you have a long lockup provision on a security, that could be problematic for somebody who really needs cash regularly and on an ongoing basis. And of course, risk tolerance. How prepared are you to lose 10%, 20%, 30% of your net portfolio in a particular investment strategy? For particular investments, FINRA says that there's not any one investment that's sort of off limits for seniors. You're free to invest in anything that you want, and financial advisors are free to recommend anything they want. So there's no class of securities or particular product type that's off limits. But the time horizon for a senior is very important, and that can have an impact on the suitability analysis. And there are certain products that you should pay special attention to, especially depending on the circumstances of the senior. There are products that have withdrawal penalties. For example, and this also relates to liquidity, like a long holding period. If you're an accredited investor, I don't know if you folks know what an accredited investor is. It's basically somebody who has income of $250,000 or a net worth of $1 million. You're allowed, entitled to invest in private securities. Securities are not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And that opens up a whole new world of securities, including things like private equity and hedge funds. But private equity, and I don't want to give a tutorial on it, but private equity is a type of investment that has a long period. So if you invest in private equity, you better be prepared that that investment could be a 10-year investment, and for you to get out of that investment is going to be financially painful. So if you're a senior investor and you need access to that, it doesn't matter how great that private equity is, it's probably not the right investment for you, something you probably shouldn't be doing. If the security doesn't provide a benefit in your lifetime, and I'll give an example of this, and this cuts both ways. If the security, if you're 80 years old and your life expectancy is 85, and you buy a bond that matures in 10 years, I've seen it argued by lawyers who sue brokerage firms that that's per se unsuitable. That investor will never see the benefit of that matured bond because there's no reasonable expectation of it. Now, there's ways to defend a claim like that, because it could be that maybe the buyer of the security never intends to be the one who gets the matured security. They're making intergenerational purchase of a security. But nonetheless, those are things that you should pay attention to. Complex products. This is a really, really hot topic, and it has been a hot topic for the last 10 or so years. Products that have features that are not ordinary. I mean, obviously we know what a stock is, we know what a bond is, most people know what a mutual fund is, but the financial engineering that's taking place today with derivatives, with structured products, with annuities, a lot of these things are so complicated now that the regulators take a view, it's almost they've reversed the presumption. If you're a senior investor, the financial advisor almost has to prove that you understood that, as opposed to the other way around, where the normal investor has to say, I didn't understand it, and the disclosure didn't make any sense to me. So you have to be, complex products are something that should be thought about. And a note about structured products. I don't know, does anyone know what structured products are? Anyone familiar with them? Okay. Structured products are, this guy does. Structured products are financially engineered they're securities. They're debt securities. And I'll take an example like a Merrill Lynch. So Merrill Lynch creates its own structured product. And what it is, they'll take a zero coupon bond, which is a bond that matures. It's like an old government bond. She mentioned government bonds. You buy it, it's got a face value of $100, but in 7 years, that's a zero coupon bond. The value accretes to the point of time when the security matures. So it shows the face of what it will be worth someday in the future. They'll take a zero coupon bond, they'll mix it with some derivatives, and so long as you lock your money up with them for 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, they'll guarantee that you get some set payment in 10 years, 11 years, and they'll use the zero coupon bond to get there, and then they'll do all sorts of other investments with that margin for the zero coupon bond. I'm not explaining this as well as I could, but the gist of it is you can do all sorts of things with zero coupon bonds and with derivatives. So they make these structured products, and financially they can do all sorts of things. So you can get an investment that if certain benchmarks are hit, it'll have a 10% coupon. Now, I don't know about you, but if you go to the bank today and look at what the yield is on a 5-year CD, it's awful. It's never been worse. I mean, in Europe, they have negative interest rates. You have to pay them to hold your money. So people, especially retirees and people on fixed income, are very, very concerned about yield. Yield's an important consideration. It's a huge consideration. So if you can show a senior, hey, I've got this structured product, and so long as the S&P 500 stays above this threshold, you're going to get 7% on it. And you're going to get 7% for the next 6 years. But what you don't know, if you're not paying attention, is if the S&P goes under that threshold, it turns into a zero coupon bond. All you get back is what you put in, and you get no interest. And so these things can be sold as income producing things when they really aren't. So structured products and senior investors are a very tricky thing. Some red flags that would come up. And this is true for financial advisors, for their children, for people looking at portfolios. You know, obviously using retirement savings, early withdrawals for speculative investments. The use of margin. Margin is the borrowing of money to buy securities. That's all it is. There's two types of margin loans. There's purpose and non-purpose. You can actually you can do sort of two different things with margin lending. But another thing that folks do is they'll take the home equity and use it to borrow for securities. For seniors, that's probably a bad idea. The circumstances have to be right to do that. I know that if I were the compliance officer at a brokerage firm, I would not be comfortable with that at all. Now, this is interesting because this is like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. A red flag would be if you are assuming too much risk to get a senior citizen a high enough coupon. So everybody knows risk, the more risk you're willing to get, the greater the return can be. So if you want, the safest investment in the world is a U.S. Treasury bond. And that will pay you nothing. And the most dangerous bond you could get is you can get a junk bond issued by a technology company in California or Brazil that is on the edge of bankruptcy, and they're willing to pay 14% a year because chances are you won't get the money at all anyway. So with greater risk comes greater reward. So if you have an investor, I say, I need 8% a year. Well, gee, the only way you can get 8% a year is if you invest in a security that puts your entire principal at risk. So you have to be careful that you calibrate the need for income with the risk that you're willing to take. The flip side of that is if you have an investor who needs preservation, but you put them all in treasuries, so they generate no income. So you have to be careful. The red flag can work either way. Either you're not taking enough risk, or you're taking too much risk. Outsized losses and returns. An anecdote here. My father passed away 2 years, but before he did, he was a very conservative investor. He didn't have much to invest, but he was a conservative investor nonetheless. And he called me one time because he knew the business I worked in, and said, I'm really concerned because a part of his portfolio he invested, and he got a 10% return in 1 month. Now, most people would say, that's great. I got a 10% return. He said, well, I'm nervous because if I got a 10% return in 1 month, I could lose 10% in a month. I said, you're absolutely right. So if you have, it's not always great to have outsized returns. If you have outsized returns on a portfolio that you really don't want to lose the money in, that outsized return the next month or the next year can equal an outsized loss. So that would be a red flag as well. So, okay. Staying current, this is true for any investor, but it's also true for senior investors in particular. It's like anything else. We talked about in the beginning, KYC, know your customer. They need to know the details of who you are and what your circumstances are. So these are the types of things, but they take on a special significance for seniors when it comes to issues related to health, income, change in tax status, and liquidity. Again, I don't want to harp on liquidity, but when you're a 40-year-old, the liquidity of your investments typically isn't as important because the main driver of how you live is your income, right? You're working, you're reaching the point of your career where you'll make the most money that you're ever going to make. When you're a senior citizen and the liquidity becomes a lot more important because income should shrink, Social Security benefits, a pension benefit should shrink in terms of its relative importance in the overall spectrum of your portfolio. So, elder financial abuse, and this is a really big issue right now. This and diminished capacity. So what is elder financial abuse? I know that Allison had touched on this. It's basically taking advantage of someone who's elderly from a position of trust. It's cashing someone's check, forging a signature, coercing someone into signing something without explaining what it is. It's taking advantage of someone, and in this instance, it's taking advantage of an elderly person, and it's taking advantage of them with respect to their finances. It's a growing problem. So there was a survey that was done, it's referenced here in the year 2000, about elder abuse generally. And so elder abuse can take many forms, not just financial, but this survey found that 13% of all elder abuse is financial. And the writers of this report said they actually think it's much, much higher than that. It's just that people don't report it. And I think it's going to be a much bigger problem as time goes on for obvious reasons. We have two factors. The largest generation in the history of the country is retiring and aging. And second, we have economic uncertainty and anxiety among the generation that's behind them to a degree that we never had before. So you have a generation that's retiring that has wealth, and you have a generation behind them that is impoverished. And so both the issues of the temptation to do things, the lack of a moral character to not do them is only going to increase. So it's a problem that for the securities business they're well aware of and trying to get in front of. And so who does this? Allison had said this. It's absolutely true. The people who do this are the people who have access to seniors. And it's almost 60% of it is family members. And then it's neighbors and friends. And then there's a significant chunk of it that's home health aides. So it's people who have access to elderly people. These are some red flags. Again, I'm a lawyer, not a doctor or psychologist. I put this in here because I found it. It's in the materials, but I think this is some of the things that you would expect that folks who are subjected, who start changing their behaviors, who develop new relationships that cause people who've known them for many years to say, well, who's this new person that's exerting influence over their life? They no longer want to talk about their finances. Or they make an admission that they're not comfortable with the way that someone's handling this. On a personal note, I knew a relative that confided into another relative. They weren't happy the way that their power of attorney was handling and taking care of their finances. They didn't feel like they were treating people fairly. So, but this laundry list of items takes on a special, for the purposes of a portfolio and investments in the financial services industry, it takes on a special importance because the regulators are starting to impose on financial institutions the obligation to discover this. So it used to be, right, who's ever heard of the expression caveat emptor, right? That means buyer beware, right? Another way that comes up is that in a normal circumstance, we don't owe an obligation to help anybody. That's just the way it works. If somebody falls down, I don't have an obligation in the United States to help them pick them up. One of the things that has happened over the last 15 or 20 years, there's been an emphasis on regulators to make financial professionals have an affirmative obligation to help. So if they recognize, and we'll get to this in a little bit, I'll try to be quick about it, if they recognize some of these red flags and do nothing about it, they could have potential liability. They could put their license at risk. So as these things happen in the real world, financial professionals are going to be obliged to take note of them, to report them, no different than a hospital has to report abuse in any other context. Okay, diminished capacity in senior investors. There's only a couple slides here. So I found this to be very interesting before I prepared for this. So not only is the population aging, the population of the oldest old, right, those over 85 is the population that's growing the fastest relative to the rest of the aging population. And what's interesting about that, which great, it's great. I want to live past 85, so that's fantastic. But the incidence of mental diminishment increase exponentially as folks age. So your chances, if in a rough set in the population, if you're over 75, the chance of having dementia is 14%. If you're 85, the chance of having dementia is 30%. So what that means is that pocket of 85 and up, who still have assets, who still may be reasonably independent, who may still be doing all sorts of things, there's more of them now, more of them than there's ever have been, and because the incidence of diminishment can happen quickly, and now you have a group, a much greater concentration of people who may have mental diminishment. So, again, here's a laundry list of common signs. Again, I'm not a medical professional. Some of this stuff is common sense to me. Memory loss, disorientation, losing things, etc. I don't want to belabor this. But it does matter. If I were a stockbroker today and I was catering to elderly clients, or they were a significant component, you'd bet I want to know what this is, because you have to be aware of when your client is exhibiting these types of traits, because it would give you pause that not only the investments that you recommend, but whether you should be recommending investments at all or taking other action in conjunction with your firm. So the securities regulators have come up. I talked about affirmative duties to do things now. So this was really a groundbreaking thing in the securities business. FINRA publishes rules, and they propose them for comment. People comment on them, and then they become enacted. And then the rules that govern the way financial professionals have to act, at least for broker-dealers. So they propose this rule to share the responsibility for diminished capacity of investors with the firms. So I'm a stockbroker. I have an elderly client. The client is showing signs of diminished capacity. I have to take action, or I will have to take action if this becomes a rule, which we expect it will. I have to do things about it. It also changes the documents that have to be filled out when you open a brokerage account. So now when you fill out a brokerage account, they're going to want to get a name of a trusted contact. You don't have to give it, but they're going to ask you for it, so don't be surprised about that. It's kind of a weird question when you think about it. I'm the trusted contact for my own money, or my wife. I don't want to have anybody else listed on my account unless I want to. But they're going to ask you for another person that they could call if they think there's some problem. The firms now will have an obligation to freeze your account if they suspect that you that there's some form of elder abuse or diminished capacity. They'll have a safe harbor. A safe harbor means that they're free from liability. If they act in good faith, they'll have an ability to freeze your assets until that gets determined whether there's an issue with your account. That's good and bad, right? I mean, I think it's good in one level, but then again, it's giving a lot of power to financial institutions over your assets, and maybe you don't want them to have that power. And the North American Securities Administrators Association, which essentially are the regulators at the state level. We have one in the state of Connecticut. There's 50 of them. And they get together. They tend to be as a body, they tend to be really, really pro-consumer, so they're pro-investor. They've also put out guidance for firms for what to do about financial exploitation and diminished capacity issues. Okay, recent regulatory initiatives. All right, so these are some of the hot button issues, which is a synthesis of what I've just been talking about. So financial institutions like the bank examiner, FINRA, the SEC, they come into these shops, they look at them, they look at their books, they examine them. So these are the things that they're looking for, and they really are looking at these things. They're specifically focused on senior citizens in a way they haven't been before. The types of investments that they buy, the suitability of them, the use of senior designations. So it used to be, not that long ago, I could be a stockbroker and present myself as, I'm a elderly expert. Like how Allison had described her as an elder law professional. They might say, I'm an elder portfolio expert. They just made it up. And they're not allowed to do that anymore. These types of stockbrokers have always had persnickety rules around designations, like made-up designations. But sometimes seniors would trust, oh, well, he says he's an elder law expert, an elder portfolio expert, so he must know what he's talking about. Well, maybe he doesn't, and he made it up. So the designations are important. The way that investments are marketed to seniors has changed. It used to be very common, even when I started at Morgan Stanley 11 years ago, that there would be seminars at retirement centers, at even nursing homes. A financial advisor would come in, they'd set up a presentation like this, they would show some investments they're looking at to try to convince them, and they'd give a free lunch. Not different than, when I think they do the, I'm trying to think of the vacation rentals, where they give you a week, or they give you 2 days at the, for the timeshare, right. I never was able to take advantage of that. So they've changed the marketing of it. You have to be careful with that now. If you're a financial professional, the way that you market to seniors, the disclosures that are made to seniors. And it's a huge, huge focus of regulatory initiative. So there's a couple of things here. They're in the materials. FINRA has a seniors helpline. It's primarily used from the state of Florida. But that said, there's a number you can call if you had a question, if you think, my broker said this, or I lost this, or whatever, they will try to give impartial advice. It's a relatively new thing. I don't know how successful it's going to be because anyone will tell you the devil's in the details, so it's hard to give general advice about anybody's portfolio or the actions anybody else took. But they have that, just general help. There was a senior initiative that was taken by the SEC and FINRA, where all of those items I just discussed, those hot button items, they came up and they basically went in and did a very thorough exam with seniors in mind, and what they should be focused on. And a lot of the rules that we're seeing that are coming out now are a result of this exam initiative they did in 2013. Okay, and so here's some resources. I just want to tell you what they are. They're the website, so you can type them in. FINRA has a website dedicated to senior investors where they aggregate information. That's the first one. The North American Securities Administrators, that's the second one. That's the states. The third one's the SEC. The fourth is a PDF relating to diminished capacity and the rules around that. And the fifth is a website called BrokerCheck. Has anyone heard of BrokerCheck? You have. Okay. Well, all right. And does everyone have a stockbroker? Or most of you? Okay. All right. Well, this is a good website. BrokerCheck. You go to BrokerCheck, and you can look up your broker's history, his employment history. I think you can even get the grades on his Series 7 exam or her exam, and if they have any complaint history, if they got fired somewhere, whatever. It's a way to get information about, and the firm too. Like supposing you run into somebody who works for a firm you never heard of. You're like, is this a real firm? I mean, I've never heard of this firm, XYZ Securities. You can go and look them up. So you can look up the individual and you can look up the firm, get all the details of